Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. Sometimes the most complicated stories don't come from strangers, but from the people we let closest into our lives. Tonight's story is one of those moments where boundaries blur, emotions take over, and a single choice changes everything. It's not an easy story to tell, but it's a real one, a true infidelity story that will make you think twice about love, temptation, and the hidden cracks inside a marriage. Imagine a quiet evening at home, where nothing seems unusual. The lights are dim, the world outside is calm, and everything feels ordinary. But behind closed doors, a secret was unfolding, one that no one could have predicted. Two people who should have been nothing more than family found themselves drawn together, caught between desire and the fear of being discovered. They knew it was wrong, they knew it could destroy everything, yet they couldn't stop. The intensity of that moment was impossible to ignore. At the center of this story is a woman in her early 20s, recently married, still learning the rhythm of a new life. On the surface, her world looked picture-perfect. She had a loving husband, a family who welcomed her, and a stable home. But beneath that calm surface, emotions stirred. Loneliness crept in, unspoken feelings lingered, and one person noticed what others did not. That person was her husband's stepfather, a man nearly twice her age, who should have been nothing more than a supportive figure in her new life. But closeness has a way of testing limits, and late-night conversations soon turned into something more. What began as innocent comfort became a dangerous game of unspoken desire. Each stolen glance, each touch that lingered too long, pushed them further toward something they couldn't undo. They knew the risk. They knew the consequences. But in that moment, the pull was stronger than the fear. And just when they thought they could keep their secret safe, everything almost fell apart. Because that was the night her mother-in-law came home earlier than expected. The sound of the door opening, footsteps echoing down the hallway, it was the kind of shock that sends your heart racing, your breath catching in your throat. Panic set in. They weren't ready, they weren't prepared, and yet there was no turning back. What would happen if they were discovered? How could they explain the unexplainable? This is where the story truly begins, on the edge of exposure, where love, guilt, and temptation collide. As you listen, think about the choices people make when they're caught between what they want and what they know is right. Have you ever found yourself drawn to someone you knew you shouldn't be? Do you believe that one mistake defines a person forever, or can something forbidden ever be forgiven? She had always believed marriage would feel like a fairy tale. At 22, she thought being a wife meant she would finally have stability, love, and a sense of belonging she had been searching for her whole life. Her husband, only a few years older, worked long hours, and most evenings she found herself alone in the house, waiting for him to return. At first, she didn't mind. She told herself this was normal, that building a life together sometimes meant sacrificing time. But slowly, the loneliness grew heavier, and silence began to fill the spaces where laughter should have been. That was when her husband's stepfather started noticing things no one else did. He was in his 40s, confident in a quiet way, and carried himself with a calmness that drew people in. He would ask her if she had eaten, if she was tired, if she was okay when her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes. Those simple gestures felt like more than kindness. They felt like someone truly seeing her when she felt invisible. It began with conversations in the kitchen while she cooked dinner. He would linger by the counter, offering to chop vegetables or wash dishes, making small talk that soon turned into long, thoughtful exchanges. They spoke about everything: dreams, regrets, the weight of expectations. The age gap should have kept them apart, but instead, it made his attention feel even more intense. He wasn't like her husband, who was always rushing, distracted, and tired. The stepfather slowed down, listened, and gave her something she didn't realize she craved: undivided attention. There were moments when she caught herself staring at him a little too long, wondering what it would feel like to be held by someone who seemed to understand her so deeply. And then there were times when his hand would brush hers while passing a plate, and the air between them shifted. Neither of them spoke about it, but the silence was charged with something neither could deny. The danger of it all made her heart beat faster. She knew it was wrong. She knew she was risking everything, but there was something intoxicating about being wanted in a way she hadn't felt in months. Each day, the line between right and wrong blurred just a little more, until the thought of being caught almost became part of the thrill. What made it even more complicated was her relationship with her mother-in-law. She respected her, admired her strength, and wanted desperately to be accepted as part of the family. But with every secret glance and every unspoken feeling, she knew she was walking on dangerous ground. If her mother-in-law ever found out, it wouldn't just be betrayal, it would be destruction. That's why the night she came home early was burned into her memory. One minute, everything was quiet, private, and hidden. The next, the sound of keys at the door shattered the moment. She froze, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear. He looked at her, panic flashing in his eyes, and for a second, neither of them moved. The world outside that room didn't exist until it suddenly did. The suspense of that moment hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. They weren't ready for the consequences, and yet they had no choice but to face whatever came next. Every second stretched into forever, and she knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. The sound of the front door closing that night lingered in her ears long after her mother-in-law had walked inside. She and the stepfather had managed to compose themselves quickly, acting as if nothing unusual was happening, but the tension in the room was undeniable. Every word her mother-in-law spoke felt heavier, every glance felt like a test. The woman tried her best to steady her voice, to look normal, yet her racing heart betrayed her calm smile. She wondered if her mother-in-law could sense something, if a mother's instinct was strong enough to pick up on what they were hiding. After that evening, everything between her and the stepfather shifted. There was no longer just quiet attraction or secret stares. Now there was a shared fear, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. But instead of pulling them apart, it tied them closer. They both knew how reckless it was, yet they kept finding excuses to be near one another. Sometimes it was as simple as sharing coffee in the morning when the house was still half asleep. Other times it was staying up late, sitting side by side in the living room while everyone else had gone to bed. The main conflict grew heavier with each passing day. She loved her husband, or at least she told herself she did. He was kind in his own way, hardworking and reliable. But she couldn't ignore the emptiness that had crept into their marriage. Every time he brushed her off with a quick "I'm tired," or left her waiting for hours without a call, she found herself turning to the one man she shouldn't. And the more she leaned on him, the harder it became to imagine her life without that connection. The stepfather was conflicted too. He knew he was walking on dangerous ground, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt. He had built a life trying to be the dependable one, the man who kept the family steady. Yet here he was, drawn into a situation that could destroy the very family he had helped hold together. In his quieter moments, he would pull away, creating distance, reminding her that what they were doing could never be right. But it never lasted. The silence between them was too heavy, the longing too strong. Meanwhile, a subtle subplot began to take shape. Her mother-in-law, though never suspicious enough to confront, started making little comments that unsettled her. Questions about whether she was happy in her marriage. Observations about how much time she spent in the kitchen when her husband wasn't home. Compliments about how lucky her husband was to have someone so attentive. Each remark left her wondering if they were just innocent words or veiled warnings. Even her husband unknowingly added to the tension. One evening, he came home earlier than usual, finding her sitting at the table with his stepfather, both of them deep in conversation. His expression was warm and trusting, but she felt guilt wash over her so intensely that she could hardly breathe. She laughed too quickly at his jokes, avoided his eyes, and spent the rest of the night replaying the scene in her mind. The suspense continued to build. Every interaction carried the risk of discovery. Every moment of closeness felt like a stolen secret. She often lay awake at night, torn between fear and desire, asking herself if she was in love or if she was simply chasing something she could never truly have. The days that followed seemed almost unbearable. Every time she was in the same room as her husband's stepfather, the tension thickened. They no longer needed words. The silence between them spoke louder than anything. A glance across the dinner table, a brush of the hand while passing a plate, even the way he stood a little too close in the hallway, it was all enough to send her heart racing. Yet the danger of being caught was always there, lingering like a shadow that grew longer with each passing day. Her mother-in-law's presence only made it worse. She had a way of walking into a room at the exact wrong moment, making them both flinch as though she might see something they were trying to hide. The woman couldn't tell if it was simple coincidence or sharp intuition. Every smile from her mother-in-law felt like it carried another meaning, and every question seemed to hold a layer of suspicion. The fear of discovery kept her on edge, but it also deepened the connection she had with the one man she should have avoided. It was as if the danger itself made it harder to pull away. At night, she would lie awake in bed, her husband asleep beside her, and replay every moment in her mind. The guilt gnawed at her, yet so did the longing. She asked herself over and over, was it love, or just temptation disguised as comfort? Was she risking everything for something fleeting, or was this the kind of connection people spend a lifetime searching for? The questions had no answers, but the feelings only grew stronger. The turning point came on an ordinary evening that was anything but ordinary. The house was quiet, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that makes every sound echo louder. She thought she was safe, that the moment was theirs alone, until the sharp sound of a car pulling into the driveway made her freeze. It was too early for her husband. It was her mother-in-law. Panic surged through her body. The sudden rush of footsteps, the sound of keys rattling, the front door unlocking, it all happened so quickly that her breath caught in her throat. She and the stepfather exchanged a look that said everything words could not. If they were discovered now, there would be no explanation, no escape. The moment stretched like forever. Every second felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to explode into the open. She could already imagine the fallout, the betrayal in her husband's eyes, the devastation in her mother-in-law's voice, the destruction of everything she had built. But the door swung open, and the suspense was unbearable. They weren't ready. They weren't prepared. And the question that hung between them was not if they would be caught, but when. The moment her mother-in-law walked through the front door, the tension in the room was so sharp it felt like it could cut through the air. The woman forced herself to smile, to greet her warmly, to act as though nothing was wrong. The stepfather did the same, his face calm, his voice steady, but his eyes told another story. They both knew how close they were to being discovered. But what neither of them expected was what came next, a twist that made their already fragile secret even more dangerous. Her mother-in-law wasn't supposed to be home so early, yet she explained she had left her plans because she wasn't feeling well. She moved slowly, carefully, her hand pressed against her side as though something deeper was troubling her. She brushed it off as nothing serious, but the woman noticed the worry in her eyes. It was the first hint of something no one in the family had been prepared for, a sudden shift that would change how much time they all spent together under one roof. In the days that followed, her mother-in-law remained home more often, resting, asking for help around the house. That meant fewer private moments, fewer chances to slip away unnoticed. But strangely, the stepfather's attentiveness toward his wife only seemed to intensify the conflict. Watching him care for her with quiet patience only deepened the woman's confusion. On one hand, she admired him even more, seeing the devotion he showed to a partner he had promised to protect. On the other, it made her question everything. What did it mean that he could be so loyal and yet still drawn toward her? The second twist came one evening when her husband stumbled upon a fragment of the truth without realizing it. He walked into the kitchen to find her and his stepfather sitting too close, speaking in hushed voices that cut off the moment he appeared. His smile faltered just slightly, his eyes narrowing, as though he sensed something was off, but didn't want to admit it. He asked casually what they had been talking about, and she quickly invented a story about dinner plans. The stepfather went along with it, but the unease in the air lingered long after her husband left the room. That single moment planted a seed of suspicion. She could feel it in the way her husband watched her a little too carefully afterward, the way he asked small, probing questions that seemed innocent on the surface. The walls were closing in, and it wasn't only the mother-in-law they had to fear now, it was her husband too. The suspense only deepened when her mother-in-law, perhaps unaware of the hidden truth, began confiding in her. Late at night, while sipping tea at the kitchen table, she spoke about her fears, about how hard it was to keep a marriage strong through the years, about the importance of trust. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper, because the woman knew she was betraying the very thing her mother-in-law valued most. The stakes were higher than ever. Every look, every secret word, every brush of the hand felt like stepping closer to the edge of a cliff. The risk of falling, of losing everything, loomed larger with each passing day. The breaking point arrived on a night that should have been ordinary. The woman was in the kitchen, preparing dinner while her husband worked late again. Her mother-in-law rested in the living room, and the stepfather hovered nearby, offering to help. It was the kind of moment that had become dangerously familiar, quiet, close, and charged with everything they had been hiding. But this time, they weren't as careful as before. Her husband came home earlier than expected, walking through the door just as she and the stepfather shared a look that said too much. It was only a second, but it was enough. His eyes darted between them, and the silence that followed was louder than any confession could have been. He asked a simple question, "What's going on here?" But the weight behind it was impossible to ignore. Her heart pounded as she searched for words, but before she could speak, her mother-in-law rose from the couch. She had been watching too, quietly observing for weeks, and now her face carried the truth she had long suspected. The room froze as she looked from her husband to her daughter-in-law, then to her own partner. The betrayal was laid bare without anyone needing to explain. The climax hit like a storm. Voices rose, questions flew, and the fragile walls of secrecy shattered. Her husband demanded answers, his voice trembling with hurt and disbelief. The stepfather tried to take the blame, insisting it had been his weakness, his fault. The woman, caught between guilt and heartbreak, struggled to speak through the tears she could no longer hold back. The family that once felt steady was suddenly fractured, each member forced to confront the truth they had been avoiding. But just when it seemed the destruction was complete, the unexpected twist revealed itself. Her mother-in-law, instead of exploding in rage, fell into a quiet, heartbreaking calm. She admitted she had known for some time, had felt the distance growing, and had chosen to stay silent until the truth revealed itself. What shocked them all was her confession. She too had once been caught in a forbidden connection years earlier, one that nearly ruined her own marriage. Her voice was heavy with regret, and her admission changed everything in the room. The family stood at a crossroads. The truth was out, the pain undeniable, but so was the strange thread of understanding woven through their shared mistakes. Nothing would ever return to the way it was, but the revelation left them with a choice, to let the secret destroy them completely, or to face the consequences together. And as the woman looked at the faces around her, broken yet unmasked, she realized the story was no longer just about desire or betrayal. It was about choices, the ones made in weakness and the ones made in strength. The question that lingered was not whether they would heal, but whether they could ever truly trust again. In the days after that stormy night, the house no longer felt the same. The air was heavy with silence, not the silence of secrets, but the silence of aftermath. Each person carried their own weight, the husband with his heartbreak, the mother-in-law with her quiet sadness, the stepfather with his shame, and the woman with her guilt that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. Nothing had been left unspoken, and yet so much remained unresolved. Her husband struggled the most. At first, he barely spoke, retreating into long hours at work and late nights spent away from home. When he did talk, his words were short, clipped, and filled with a hurt that made her chest ache. He wanted to forgive. Part of him still loved her deeply, but the betrayal left scars too raw to simply move past. Their marriage became a question mark, hanging in the air, waiting to see if time could heal what had been broken. The stepfather, on the other hand, stepped back entirely. He moved with caution, keeping his distance, trying to repair the damage by becoming invisible. He avoided long conversations, avoided moments where eyes might meet too long, and slowly began to rebuild trust with his wife. His devotion to her seemed stronger than ever, as if he had realized how much he had risked losing. Watching him pour his energy into her recovery only deepened the woman's confusion. Was what she had felt with him real, or just a dangerous illusion born from loneliness? Her mother-in-law surprised them all. Instead of bitterness, she leaned into honesty. Her confession about her own past had opened a door none of them expected, and though it did not erase the pain, it softened it. She became the quiet voice reminding them that mistakes do not define people, and that sometimes the hardest truths can teach the deepest lessons. For the woman, the days became a long reflection. She thought often about love, what it meant, what it should be, and how easily it could slip into something else when left unattended. She realized her affair had not come from passion alone, but from emptiness she had been too afraid to admit. It wasn't just about desire, it was about needing to feel seen, understood, and valued. That realization stung, but it also gave her clarity about what she needed moving forward. The resolution came not in a perfect reconciliation, but in an understanding that life would never return to what it was. Her marriage might survive, or it might not, but either way, she knew she had to face her choices and grow from them. The family, scarred but still standing, chose to move forward, not forgetting, but learning. And that was the real ending, not neat or tidy, but human, messy, and painfully real. So I leave you with this. Would you believe in second chances if you were in their place, or do you think betrayal ends love for good? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know if you'd want to see a sequel exploring what happened next in their lives. Summary: this is a true infidelity story about love, loneliness, and the dangerous choices made in moments of weakness. It follows a young wife whose secret connection with her husband's stepfather threatens to tear her family apart. When secrets are exposed, emotions collide, leading to a climax filled with betrayal, regret, and unexpected confessions. In the end, the story reveals powerful lessons about temptation, forgiveness, and the fragile balance of relationships.